Well, 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 my dear, they needed you to be small, manageable, microscopic. So they pressed you under their little lenses, their little expectations, their little minds. They dissected your flaws like petty scientists of shame, poking and prodding every scar you carried like it was a case study in failure. They thought they could shrink your soul down to something bite-sized, something they could control, condemn, and classify. You see, they worship the ordinary, because the ordinary never threatens their hollow empires. But you were never meant to fit in their frame. You were written in constellations, born with chaos humming in your chest and galaxies trapped inside your silence. They stared and stared, zoomed in, criticized, labeled, speculated, but all their lenses missed the one thing they were never equipped to see: your magnitude, your divinity, the sheer cosmic madness that hides behind your eyes. What they thought were flaws were fractures of light too big for their narrow vision. They weren't analyzing you. They were witnessing a sun with their eyelids closed. They told you to be realistic. That word, they love it. Realistic. It's the graveyard where they bury dreamers. It's the leash they wrap around every soul that dared to fly too high. But you were born from fire, and fire doesn't ask permission to burn. You moved differently, didn't you? You spoke in riddles they couldn't decode. You loved with a depth they mistook for obsession. You fought with a silence so violent, it haunted their noise. And so they called you too much, too intense, too sensitive, too ambitious, too unpredictable. But too much only means you don't fit in the cage they made for you. And cages, they don't hold stars. They only block the view. So they tried to fix you. Oh, how noble of them. They offered their wisdom like poisoned candy. Be more like this, talk less like that. Maybe if you didn't wear your heart like armor. Maybe if you didn't challenge every unspoken rule. You see, the world doesn't hate uniqueness. It just hates the parts of you that make others feel inadequate. So they call your brilliance arrogance, your clarity madness, your passion delusion. Because if they can reduce you, they won't have to rise to meet you. If they can mock your fire, they can keep living cold. But what they never realized was, while they were trying to make you shrink, you were learning to stretch. You were sharpening. You were becoming. They thought they were breaking you down, when in truth, they were burning away every illusion you no longer needed. The microscope couldn't see your rise, because it was looking in the wrong damn direction. They love putting people under, don't they? Under their judgment, under their control, under their feet. They believe if they keep you under long enough, you'll forget how tall you truly are. But you remembered. You remembered even when it hurt. You remembered through the betrayal, through the silence, through the nights, where even your own reflection felt like a stranger. Because pain doesn't destroy gods, it carves them. You took every insult like a scalpel and sculpted yourself out of rage and reason. You learned to walk through storms without flinching, learned to keep your mouth shut while the world screamed at your back, learned to build temples from the bones they buried you in. They wanted to shrink you, and instead, you became the echo of everything they feared, a version of you that didn't ask to be seen, but demanded to be reckoned with. But let's not pretend you didn't feel it. Let's not lie to ourselves like they do. You did question yourself. You did look into the mirror and wonder if they were right. That's part of the process, darling. Rebirth always begins with mourning. You mourn the version of yourself that needed their approval, their validation, their crumbs of affection handed out like a sick prize. But you reached the moment they never expected. The snap, the rupture, the exact second your silence turned into steel. That was the day the microscope cracked. That was the day you stopped performing. For people who never had the depth to understand your show. They wanted a puppet, but you handed them a phoenix mid-flight. They wanted a study, but you turned into scripture. You stopped caring what they saw, because their vision was never built for glory. They only see what they can measure. You exist in wavelengths they'll never comprehend. Do you remember how they looked at you? Like a problem to solve, not a person to know. But a telescope doesn't solve. It witnesses, it marvels, it trembles. That's what you were meant for, not their inspection, but their awe. You were not born for their laboratories. You were born to make them question their gods. And now they sit in silence, wondering how the one they dismissed turned into the one they can't escape. They tried to erase you by magnifying your pain, but your pain became poetry. They tried to make you feel small, but smallness is a lie sold by people who gave up on their own magnitude. And the beautiful thing about lies? They collapse the moment truth walks in. The truth is, they were never worthy of understanding you. That's not arrogance, that's clarity. Some beings were forged beyond comprehension. They don't belong in textbooks or trials or whispered opinions passed around like gossip. They belong in legends. And legends? They don't beg to be seen. They don't explain themselves. They become. That's what you did, isn't it? You became. Despite them. Because of them. Beyond them. You grew wings while they were clipping feathers. You built a throne in the very corner they exiled you to. And now they stare again. Not through microscopes, but through fear, through envy, through disbelief. Because now they realize they were never analyzing you. They were standing in the path of a storm, wearing blindfolds. And it's not over. No. This is just the part where the silence turns into sound. This is the part where the ground starts to tremble under the weight of everything you refused to bury. The part where your story starts writing itself in lightning instead of ink. You're not done rising. You've only just remembered how high you were built to climb. They always thought they'd see the end of you before they saw the evolution of you. But what they failed to realize is that some storms don't pass, they become. And now that you've remembered your altitude, the air is different, thinner, colder, too high for the ones who mocked your silence and underestimated the avalanche building in your chest. They stare up now, not because they care, but because they can no longer deny the tremors shaking the ground they once ruled. You didn't just rise, you outgrew their gravity. You tore away from the orbit of their manipulations and became something untraceable, too high to reach, too fast to predict, too rare to replicate. You were never made to crawl under their feet. You were made to walk on stars barefoot, bleeding brilliance from wounds they thought would cripple you. The irony is poetic. They wanted you small so they could feel big. But now, standing in the shadow of everything you've become, they can't even find themselves. You didn't destroy them. You simply removed the mirror they used to measure their worth You stopped playing the game. You dropped the script they handed you and rewrote every scene with fire in your veins and a vengeance made of elegance. You see, revenge isn't always blood and thunder. Sometimes it's the echo of your name in rooms they swore you'd never enter. Sometimes it's the way their voices drop when someone mentions you. Not because they hate you, but because they know you proved them wrong, and you never had to scream to do it. The thing about greatness is, it doesn't announce itself in the language of the mediocre. It speaks in storms, in silence, in shifts that only the awakened can feel. And you became a shift, a fault line, a pulse in the universe that disrupted their illusions. They tried to confine you to a narrative built on their fears, but you were never a character. You were always the author, and now you're writing chapters in ink that burns. They thought the story ended with your exile, but that was just the comma before the climax. The point where the underdog stopped trying to be understood and started becoming undeniable. They'll tell stories about you now, but only half of them will be true. The other half will be stitched with envy, cloaked in revision, drenched in the bitterness of those who couldn't bear to see you win. They'll say you changed. Of course you did. Only fools stay stagnant to soothe the comfort of cowards. You changed because you evolved, because you bled in the places they mocked and turned those wounds into wings. They watched your fall like spectators at a funeral, but what they witnessed was a rebirth in disguise. And now they scramble for explanations, clinging to old memories of a version of you that no longer exists. They knew you once, but they'll never know this you. The one carved from silence, the one that walks through rooms like a loaded prophecy, the one who doesn't just survive, but redefines what it means to be untouchable. Let them whisper. Let them analyze. Let them piece together their versions of you like broken glass puzzles. They'll only cut themselves trying to understand what was never meant to be held. Because you don't belong on display. You belong in motion. Too raw, too wild, too sacred to be paused. They mistook your stillness for weakness, never realizing still waters don't reflect. They drown. And now you drown their certainty. Every word you speak shakes their foundation. Every move you make exposes the cowardice they built their confidence on. You don't need revenge in the traditional sense. You don't need to strike, because your presence is a wound they can't cauterize. They'll say you became cold, detached. But what they call cold is actually clarity. You see through everything now, every lie, every fake embrace, every applause laced with envy. You don't react the way you used to, not because you've gone numb, but because you've gone nuclear. You don't need to explode to cause damage. Your very existence distorts the space around you. You are the consequence, and the ones who once put you under the microscope, they're now fumbling with broken lenses, trying to zoom out fast enough to comprehend the monument you've become. They say truth sets you free, but in your case, it turned you into a storm that can't be locked down. You found your truth buried beneath the noise. In the silence they feared, you pulled it out with trembling hands and turned it into a weapon, not to attack, but to illuminate. And light burns liars alive. Your truth didn't just liberate you, it condemned them. It left them naked under the spotlight of their own hypocrisy. The same people who tried to reduce you are now being reduced to shadows, faceless, forgotten, trembling in corners they once owned. You never needed their understanding. That was the lie. The illusion that kept you begging at closed doors and whispering your worth into ears that were never listening. But the moment you turned away, the moment you stopped needing, you became what they could never anticipate: unstoppable. Because people who stop needing become forces, and forces don't explain themselves. They just arrive. Now the game has flipped. They squint to see you, because you've moved far beyond the field they used to rule. You don't play by their metrics. You're not a title, a role, or a label anymore. You're a movement, a ripple in time they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to catch up to. And the most terrifying part? You did it all without them, without their approval, without their applause. You did it while they watched, while they waited, while they whispered. You were the storm they laughed at until the first lightning bolt shattered their sky. And by then, it was too late to run. So let them linger in confusion. Let them sit in the ruins of the games they played. You're not going back to explain how you rose, because those who tried to bury you don't deserve to know how you bloomed. This isn't your revenge. This is your ascension. And from here, from this height, the air gets colder, the view gets clearer, and the silence you once feared, it becomes your throne. And now, seated on silence, you no longer roar, because you don't need to. You've become the kind of presence that speaks in absence, a legend that lingers in the hush before the storm. They look around, hoping you'll stumble again, not realizing your downfall was the very thing that rewrote the laws of your universe. The old you died in the rubble, and what emerged wasn't a rebirth. It was a revelation, a force so vast, so unapologetically raw, that the language of your enemies collapsed, trying to define it. They built microscopes to study your scars, to reduce your legacy to moments of weakness, hoping to trap your essence inside frames of failure. But what they saw was only a fraction, a filtered reflection of your vastness. They measured your darkness but never dared to navigate it. Because within that void, you built galaxies. You weren't trying to be understood anymore. You became a paradox, too bright to look at directly, too complex to classify, too eternal to erase. You are not the result of their validation. You are the residue of their rejection, turned gold in the furnace of isolation. While they laughed at the ashes, you were forming structure. While they danced around your broken pieces, you were busy becoming fireproof. And now their words are weightless. Their assumptions collapse midair. They speak your name in riddles, trying to guess what phase you're in. But you're no longer phases. You're the full eclipse. You don't enter rooms anymore. You shift their energy the moment your name echoes through their thoughts. You became the very thing they were never trained to recognize. Someone who doesn't seek revenge to destroy, but to expose. You didn't need to tear their walls down. You simply stood so tall that their castles looked like cardboard. You didn't steal their light. You revealed they never had any. And now they're forced to face the terrifying truth. It was never about making you smaller. It was always about hiding how small they were. You know what haunts them the most? The fact that you didn't fight dirty. You didn't beg. You didn't explain. You didn't unravel yourself to gain sympathy. You just left, quietly, powerfully. You turned the lock, burned the blueprint, and built something so colossal that their names no longer fit in your chapters. They search for versions of you they can manage, easier versions, quieter ones, tame reflections that make them feel relevant. But those fragments, they died the day you chose to evolve past their comprehension. You're not just surviving, you're sculpting. Every breath you take now is an act of defiance. Every step, a nail in the coffin of their expectations. You became the monument they never thought you could build, standing in the space where they planted your tombstone. And what's poetic about it all? You never had to raise your voice. You let your growth do the screaming. You let your silence carry a blade. Because in the end, it was never about vengeance. It was about dominance. You redefined what it means to overcome, not by climbing their ladder, but by building your own mountain. And from that height, their noise is nothing but wind. Their bitterness, just weather. You don't flinch anymore, because you've seen what breaks you and still chose to walk barefoot through the fire. They can't understand how you're still standing, but that's the wrong question. You're not just standing, you're ascending, because gravity doesn't apply to those who've mastered their fall. They'll say you've become cruel, detached, dangerous, and maybe they're right. Maybe the world needs more people who've tasted despair and came out unshaken. Maybe what they call danger is actually the price of awakening. Because once you've seen the machinery behind the masks, you stop playing nice. You stop nodding at fools. You stop shrinking so others feel tall. You stop bleeding to keep bandages on the ones who cut you. You choose yourself. And in a world that profits from your doubt, choosing yourself is the most violent rebellion of all. Let them think you're distant now, as if your silence isn't sacred, as if you're obligated to explain the transformation that left you untouchable. They couldn't handle the broken version of you. What makes them think they're worthy of the evolved one? You didn't owe them answers when you were falling. You sure as hell don't owe them applause now that you've risen. Because what you've built in the dark, it's not for them. It's for you. It's the cathedral of your pain turned into poetry. It's the altar of your resilience, towering too high for their poison to reach. This isn't just the end of their narrative. It's the birth of yours, unfiltered, undiluted, and unafraid. You don't hide your darkness anymore, you wear it. Like armor, like royalty. You don't smile to be polite. You smirk because you know something they never will, what it feels like to lose everything and still become everything. And that kind of power, it terrifies them because it doesn't need attention to exist. It doesn't need recognition to roar. It simply is. And they can't kill what doesn't seek approval. So let them obsess. Let them dissect. Let them worship old versions of you while choking on the dust of their own irrelevance. You're not their villain. You're their mirror. And mirrors never lie. They only show what's been hidden. You weren't made to be digestible. You were made to disrupt, to awaken, to burn down illusions and make space for the divine chaos of your truth. You don't fit in their world because their world was never big enough. It never had room for your rage, your grace, your ruin, your rebirth. And now, you walk like every step is a reminder that you weren't broken. You were reshaped. That your silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. That the microscope they built to trap you in flaws, it couldn't even begin to capture your magnitude. Because greatness doesn't shrink for anyone. It expands, it eclipses, it dominates, not by permission, not by validation, but by right. So go on. Keep ascending. Let your very existence remain the paradox they can't decode. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be felt. A force that echoes long after you've gone. A storm that teaches the sky to kneel. A legend not written in ink, but carved in consequence. Because they needed a microscope to see you. But the universe? It needed a telescope just to begin.